Hey everyone, X here, and since I failed to upload a video game review that I had almost near finished, I've got yet another collection, and I believe it's also one of my smaller ones. It's the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, which were the first two handheld systems that I owned all the way back in the 90s. Now, at the time, I thought it was quite revolutionary being able to play games on the go. Sure, it might not have had a backlit screen with 3D graphics and Wi-Fi, but both handhelds were still enjoyable. So with nothing left else to say, let's begin. Starting with the handheld itself, the Game Boy Color. I don't have the original brick-shaped Game Boy since I sold that a while back, but mine is still in good working condition, except without the batteries included, since I can't find accessible batteries that work with the handheld. Pretty much it comes with the standard features that you would expect on a handheld from the 90s, such as the A and B buttons, the start and select, the power switch, the volume control, and an external link cable to play with a friend. So, next up is the Super Game Boy. For those of you who don't know, it lets you play your compatible Game Boy games on the Super Nintendo, which honestly is one of Nintendo's better ideas compared to the other handheld, the Virtual Boy. Or I'm not sure if it can even be called a handheld. And it was the first to let you play your handhelds on a console rather than having to squint at your Game Boy screen in the dark, for example. And each game would also display a border on the TV screen, except I believe I've heard somewhere that you can't change the borders for certain games. But now let us move on to the Game Boy games themselves. Game & Watch Gallery 2. It's a good collection of minigames starring the Mario cast. Dragon Warrior Monsters. Think of it as Pokemon meets Dragon Quest in a crossover, in a good way though, rather than it being some RPG knockoff. And it was also the first game that I played on my Super Game Boy. Super 23-in-1. It's one of those Game Boy ROM hacks that I remember getting from some video game convention back when I was a kid. There's only about 8 playable games total, and the rest are pretty much clones with different titles. Also, none of the games as seen on the cover, such as Pocket Bomberman and Pokemon Pinball, are included. Super Mario Land. Another great Mario platformer in my opinion, except that Daisy is the one in need of being rescued. Zelda Link's Awakening. It's a great addition in the Zelda series, and I also remember owning the DX remake at one point. From what I also remember seeing, there were minor cameos such as Mario Peach and Chain Chomp, as well as other characters from other franchises. Pokemon Red, Yellow, and Silver. I don't exactly prefer the Pokemon anime, but the games that the show is based off of are still fun to play. I can remember that Red was the first game that I owned for the original Game Boy. Finally, the Game Boy Color games. Zelda Oracle of Seasons. This was the first game that I played on my Game Boy Advance back in 2001, as well as it being one of the first games that I got alongside the GBA. They changed things around by releasing an Oracle of Ages, I believe that was what it was called, which had a different setting, villain, and plot. And Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, which is a direct port from the Super Mario Bros. On the NES with a few new features to be found. I also consider this to be the best Game Boy Color game, as well as being one of the best games of all time. It was the closest and first experience I remember having back in 1999 playing something similar to the original Super Mario Bros. And that is all from my Game Boy Color collection. If there is a game that you saw here that you were interested in me reviewing, or doing a Let's Play which I plan on starting in the near future, send me your requests. X.